The story of the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami begins with one of the most intense geological events ever recorded. On December 26, 2004, a massive earthquake reaching a magnitude of 9.1 struck off the coast of Sumatra in Indonesia. This earthquake was not just any seismic event. It was a mega-thrust earthquake, the type that occurs at subduction zones where one tectonic plate is forced beneath another. In this case, the Indian plate was thrust beneath the Burma plate, resulting in an enormous release of energy. This sudden and violent shift caused the Earth's crust to rupture along an underwater fault line stretching for over 900 miles. The scale of this event was extraordinary. The earthquake not only caused destruction near its epicenter, but also shifted the Earth's axis by nearly an inch and slightly sped up the planet's rotation. Such a significant change in Earth's mass distribution is rare and speaks to the sheer force of the event. This release of tectonic energy displaced an enormous volume of seawater above the fault line, setting off a series of waves that would become the infamous Indian Ocean tsunami. Unlike ordinary waves, these tsunami waves moved with tremendous speed and were nearly undetectable on the ocean surface until they reached shallow coastal areas, where they rose to staggering heights. In the moments following the earthquake, scientists across the region began to sense its implications. The U.S. Geological Survey recorded the earthquake's initial shockwaves and immediately recognized the potential for a massive tsunami. In countries with advanced warning systems, alerts were quickly issued. However, in many parts of Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and India, early warning systems were either non-existent or unable to reach affected communities in time. In the absence of rapid communication, many local residents remained unaware of the impending catastrophe, even as the waves began to move closer to their shores. What made this earthquake particularly destructive was its proximity to densely populated coastal areas. Southeast Asia is home to millions of people living along coastal communities, relying on the sea for their livelihoods and everyday life. These communities, which lined the beaches and fishing areas, were especially vulnerable. As the waves traveled across the Indian Ocean at speeds of up to 500 miles per hour, they gathered tremendous force. People living in coastal towns and villages were largely unprepared for what was coming, unaware of the magnitude of the disaster that was building offshore. In this context, understanding the Indian Ocean's geological setup is crucial. The region is a hotspot for seismic activity, lying at the intersection of the Eurasian, Australian, and Indian tectonic plates. Throughout history, this area has experienced significant earthquakes, but none had been as intense or as devastating as this one. Prior events, such as the 1833 and 1907 earthquakes in Sumatra, had caused tsunamis that served as reminders of the region's vulnerability. However, nothing could have prepared these communities for the scale of destruction that would follow in the wake of the 2004 earthquake. In the aftermath of the initial tremor, many along the coast reported strange occurrences, such as the sudden retreat of the ocean from the shore. Fish were left flopping on exposed seabeds, and curious locals ventured out to gather them, unaware that the retreat of the water was a warning sign of a tsunami. This phenomenon, known as drawback, is a rare but telling signal of an incoming wave. Tragically, many did not understand this sign, and in the moments after the earthquake, as the ocean pulled back, many people, particularly children, rushed to the beach, oblivious to the approaching danger. As this unprecedented natural disaster began to unfold, a wave of unimaginable scale and force was forming and bearing down on some of the most populated coastlines in the Indian Ocean. In these first critical minutes after the earthquake, the fates of hundreds of thousands of people across multiple nations were being sealed, even before the deadly waters made landfall. As the initial tremors subsided, the communities along the Indian Ocean's coastlines were still largely unaware of the disaster headed their way. In the wake of the 9.1 magnitude earthquake off Sumatra, the displaced water from the ocean floor triggered a tsunami of unprecedented scale. Moving silently and swiftly, the tsunami waves raced across the Indian Ocean at speeds close to 500 miles per hour, essentially as fast as a jetliner, yet invisible from above the water's surface. By the time they neared land, they transformed into towering walls of water, ready to unleash devastation upon the unsuspecting coastlines. The tsunami first struck the shores of Banda Aceh, a city in Indonesia located close to the earthquake's epicenter. Within less than 30 minutes of the earthquake, the powerful waves hit with full force, crashing into the coast and obliterating everything in their path. Buildings, homes, and vehicles were swept away as the waves surged inland, consuming entire neighborhoods. People who had survived the initial shock of the earthquake suddenly found themselves confronted with a rapidly rising wall of water. Many attempted to flee to higher ground, but with little time and almost no warning, thousands of lives were lost in those first crucial moments. As the waves continued outward from Banda Aceh, they reached other parts of Southeast Asia and beyond. Thailand, renowned for its tourist beaches and coastal resorts, was next. In places like Phuket and Khao Lak, tourists and locals alike had only moments to respond as the waves began to rise. Videos captured that day show the first small surges of water rushing up the beaches, seemingly harmless as people continued to enjoy their day, unaware of the imminent danger. But in minutes, these small surges escalated into massive, unstoppable waves that inundated hotels, shops, and restaurants along the shore. The sheer force of the water overwhelmed everything, pulling people and debris out to sea. The devastation spread far beyond Southeast Asia. In Sri Lanka, approximately 1,000 miles from the earthquake's epicenter, coastal towns were suddenly hit with powerful waves several hours after the initial quake. The eastern coastline was particularly affected, with towns like Batticaloa and Ampara witnessing catastrophic damage as the ocean surged inland. Houses were flattened, infrastructure was destroyed, and countless lives were lost. Fishing communities, whose livelihoods depended on the sea, were among the hardest hit as the waves swept away boats, nets, and coastal settlements. India, located to the west of Indonesia, was also heavily impacted. In the state of Tamil Nadu, the waves struck fishing villages along the southeastern coast, while other parts of India, including Kerala and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, faced severe destruction. In Chennai, the capital of Tamil Nadu, floodwaters surged through the streets, reaching far into urban areas that were unprepared for such an event. In the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which lay close to the earthquake's epicenter, entire communities were left isolated as the tsunami decimated local infrastructure and cut off communication with the mainland. The waves didn't stop at South Asia. The impact of the tsunami extended across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as the eastern coast of Africa. In Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania, which are located thousands of miles from the earthquake's origin, the tsunami made landfall hours after the initial event, causing additional fatalities and destruction. While the impact in Africa was less severe than in Southeast Asia, the arrival of the waves was unexpected and devastating for those communities unaccustomed to such a disaster. Across the affected regions, the waves left behind unprecedented levels of destruction. Entire coastal villages were wiped out, homes and buildings were reduced to rubble, and thousands were separated from their families in the chaos. The power of the tsunami was such that it uprooted trees, overturned vehicles, and carried debris far inland. In a matter of hours, landscapes were transformed into scenes of desolation, with barely any structure left standing to mark the places that had once been vibrant communities. In this tragic moment, the resilience of the people was tested to its limits. Survivors found themselves in a sudden struggle for survival, searching for loved ones amidst the wreckage, and beginning to assess the true scale of the catastrophe. The Indian Ocean tsunami was not just a natural disaster, it was a profound human tragedy, affecting communities across multiple countries and leaving a lasting impact on the millions of lives it touched. In the days following the Indian Ocean tsunami, the full extent of the devastation began to emerge. Across the affected countries, an estimated 230,000 lives were lost, and millions of people found themselves homeless, with entire communities swept away. Survivors faced immediate challenges. Securing food, water, shelter, and medical aid became a critical priority, as local resources were overwhelmed by the unprecedented scale of the disaster. In Banda Aceh, one of the hardest hit areas, the aftermath was particularly dire. Hospitals were overrun with the injured, and makeshift shelters sprang up as survivors sought refuge from the debris-strewn landscape. Streets were lined with displaced residents who had lost everything, including family members and friends. Infrastructure had been shattered, with roads, bridges, and communication lines wiped out, making it nearly impossible to transport essential supplies. The Indonesian government, local volunteers, and international relief teams worked around the clock to provide food, water, and medical care to survivors, but the needs were overwhelming. The human impact extended well beyond the immediate loss of life and property. Families were torn apart, with many children orphaned by the disaster. In Thailand, entire communities mourned as hundreds of children were reported missing or found alone, separated from their parents. The emotional toll was immense, People who had escaped the waves struggled with grief, trauma, and shock. Schools, places of worship, and homes had been reduced to rubble, leaving survivors with not only a physical void, but a profound sense of loss. In Sri Lanka, the eastern coast had suffered extensive damage, with hundreds of fishing villages decimated. Survivors there faced unique challenges, as fishing was the main livelihood in these areas. Boats, equipment, and infrastructure essential to their work were destroyed, leaving families without a source of income and dependent on outside assistance. Efforts to provide aid were complicated by Sri Lanka's geography and the limited accessibility of many affected areas. Roads had been flooded or damaged, making it difficult for humanitarian organizations to reach the worst-hit regions. Despite the challenges, the international community rallied to provide support, with rescue teams and volunteers arriving to assist in the relief efforts. In India, the state of Tamil Nadu was among the hardest-hit areas. Coastal towns and cities were grappling with a severe shortage of clean drinking water and food, and local hospitals were stretched to their limits. Emergency response teams from within the country mobilized quickly, setting up camps and temporary housing for those displaced by the disaster. However, the sheer number of people in need made it an enormous logistical challenge, and resources were spread thin. Many of those affected were members of fishing communities who found themselves not only dealing with loss and displacement, but also with the destruction of their livelihoods. Across the Indian Ocean, the widespread impact was a reminder of the interconnectedness of these coastal communities. Even in distant locations like Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania, the waves caused damage, with coastal residents enduring flooding, property damage, and loss of life. Though the destruction in Africa was less severe than in Asia, it highlighted the far-reaching effects of the tsunami and underscored the need for a coordinated global response to disasters of this scale. In response to the catastrophe, international aid poured into the affected countries. Governments, organizations, and individuals worldwide joined in the relief efforts, raising billions of dollars to assist those in need. Aid agencies, including the United Nations, Red Cross, and numerous NGOs, mobilized swiftly to provide medical aid, food, shelter, and other necessities. Helicopters were used to reach remote areas inaccessible by land, delivering much-needed supplies and evacuating the injured. Volunteers from all over the world arrived to help rebuild and support the survivors, while local authorities worked to coordinate the influx of aid. For the survivors, recovery would take years, and rebuilding shattered communities was an enormous task. Many people faced long-term challenges, from psychological trauma to the loss of livelihoods, and the need for resources to rebuild homes, schools, and infrastructure was immense. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami not only reshaped the physical landscape, but also left an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of those affected, a lasting reminder of nature's power and the resilience of the human spirit. Lituya Bay, located in the southeastern part of Alaska, may appear to be a quiet, peaceful fjord, but it has a history of terrifying and destructive power that most people don't even know about. On July 9, 1958, Lituya Bay became the site of one of the most shocking natural events ever recorded, a megatsunami that reached a mind-blowing height of 1,720 feet. To put that into perspective, that's taller than the Empire State Building, and no tsunami before or since has ever come close to matching that record. The event began with a massive landslide when an enormous chunk of rock, estimated to be around 30 million cubic yards in size, suddenly plunged into the bay. This was no ordinary landslide. The force of the rocks crashing into the water sent a powerful wave surging up and over the surrounding cliffs, creating a tsunami of catastrophic proportions. The wave tore through the narrow bay at an incredible speed, wiping out everything in its path. It was so powerful that it even stripped trees from the mountainsides, leaving behind a barren landscape where the lush forest had once stood. Despite how incredible and destructive the megatsunami was, there were only a few eyewitnesses. The most well-known of these witnesses were the people aboard the fishing boat, the Lynn, a vessel that was near the bay when the event occurred. The crew of the Lynn had a front-row seat to the incredible wave as it hurtled toward the shore. They managed to survive, but the impact of the megatsunami left them in awe of nature's raw power. What happened at Lituya Bay in 1958 raises a lot of questions, some of which still don't have clear answers. How exactly did the landslide happen? Was it purely a natural event, or did human activity, such as logging or other environmental factors, contribute to the disaster? And could something like this happen again? The sheer magnitude of the megatsunami's height and its unexpected nature have led to many speculations and studies over the years, but there's still no concrete understanding of all the factors involved. As scientists continue to study Lituya Bay and its unusual geography, the mystery deepens. The bay is surrounded by steep cliffs that create a narrow, confined space. This trapped environment amplifies the force of natural events, making Lituya Bay a particularly dangerous and unstable place. The landscape, combined with the ongoing tectonic activity in the region, sets the stage for even more potential disasters in the future. Scientists have learned that the same geological forces that caused the megatsunami of 1958 are still at play today, meaning that Lituya Bay's danger has never fully passed. As we move forward, we'll dive deeper into the science behind what happened in 1958 and explore the ongoing risks that this place faces. Stay tuned as we continue this journey through one of the most fascinating and dangerous natural events in history. In order to understand the full scale of the 1958 megatsunami in Lituya Bay, we need to explore the geological forces that made it possible. The event didn't happen randomly. The bay is situated in a region with a unique and volatile combination of factors that make it prone to natural disasters, especially ones as destructive as a megatsunami. Lituya Bay is a narrow fjord, which means it's a body of water surrounded by steep, towering cliffs. The geography here is a major part of what turned a landslide into a record-breaking tsunami. When the rock slide occurred on that fateful day in July, the steep cliffs funneled the massive amount of energy from the falling debris into a concentrated area. This caused the water to rise with such force that the wave reached an unimaginable height. With nowhere for the energy to escape, the force of the water surged upward rather than spreading out over a larger area. It created a tsunami that was much more powerful than what you'd typically see in the open ocean, but what made this particular landslide so massive? For starters, the region around Lituya Bay is incredibly seismically active. The Pacific and North American tectonic plates are constantly shifting, and the pressure between them builds up over time. This ongoing movement of the Earth's crust can trigger massive earthquakes, which in turn can cause landslides. In fact, it's believed that the landslide that triggered the megatsunami was caused by a relatively small earthquake, measuring about 7.8 on the Richter scale. While not a huge earthquake by some standards, it was enough to send tons of rock crashing into the bay. The landslide itself wasn't just a random event. It was part of the complex natural forces that had been at play in the region for thousands of years. The bay's geological history is filled with tectonic activity, and its physical structure makes it prone to events like this. With steep cliffs and a narrow channel, the water in Lituya Bay is essentially trapped in a confined space. When something like a landslide occurs, the water doesn't have much room to spread out, and it ends up pushing straight up and over the cliffs, creating a catastrophic wave. Adding to the danger of the bay is the region's high level of seismic activity. Earthquakes are a regular occurrence, and while most are small, larger ones can trigger events like the landslide that led to the megatsunami. The energy released from these earthquakes can shake loose unstable rock formations, triggering massive rock slides into the bay. This, combined with the topography of the bay itself, creates a perfect storm for disaster. Understanding the geological makeup of Lituya Bay helps explain why this megatsunami was so devastating, but it also raises important questions about future events. The forces at work here haven't gone away. In fact, they're still very much present. The same tectonic activity that triggered the 1958 disaster could cause similar events to occur again. With ongoing seismic activity in the region, Lituya Bay remains a place of concern for scientists studying the area. As we move on, we'll look at the aftermath of the megatsunami and how scientists have studied its effects. Despite its terrifying nature, this event has provided valuable insights into the power of natural disasters and the ways we can better understand and prepare for them in the future. The aftermath of the 1958 Lituya Bay megatsunami was both stunning and sobering. The destructive wave, which reached an unimaginable height of 1,720 feet, left an indelible mark on the landscape and offered valuable insights into the forces that shape our planet. In the hours and days following the disaster, scientists and survivors began to grasp the full scope of the devastation. The most immediate and visible effect of the megatsunami was the widespread destruction of the surrounding forest. As the waves surged up the cliffs and crashed into the mountains, it stripped trees from the slopes, leaving behind a barren and eerie landscape. The water's sheer force was so great that it uprooted massive trees and left them scattered across the bay, some of them still floating in the water long after the event. The power of the wave was undeniable, and its impact on the environment was clear. Not only were trees destroyed, but the wave also caused significant erosion along the cliffs, leaving scars on the land that are still visible today. Remarkably, the megatsunami's effects were not limited to just the surrounding environment. The local population, who lived in small villages near the bay, were lucky to escape the full force of the disaster. While there were no fatalities directly linked to the megatsunami itself, the event did cause major disruptions to local communities. The destruction of land and wildlife affected the livelihoods of those who depended on the region's natural resources for survival. Despite the isolated nature of the bay, the force of the event was felt across the surrounding area, and the cleanup and recovery process was long and difficult. One of the most fascinating aspects of the 1958 megatsunami is the fact that only a few people witnessed the event firsthand. A small number of boats were in the bay at the time, and while most were able to escape the brunt of the wave, one fisherman and his family were in a boat near the shoreline when the wave struck. Their accounts provide an eerie glimpse into the terrifying power of the disaster. As the wave hit, the water in the bay suddenly surged, and they reported seeing the mountain cliffs on either side of them disappear into a wall of water. The fisherman and his family were lucky to survive, but their experience is a vivid reminder of the destructive potential of such an event. The scientific community was quick to respond to the megatsunami, conducting studies to understand its full scope and the forces that made it possible. Researchers used a combination of eyewitness accounts, geological surveys, and data from nearby seismic stations to piece together the puzzle of what had happened. What they discovered was a rare and unusual event that, while not common, could potentially happen again. The megatsunami in Lituya Bay was not just a freak accident, but rather a reminder of the raw power that exists in Earth's geological processes. As researchers began to analyze the event, they realized that the Lituya Bay megatsunami was unique, not only because of its extreme height, but also because of the specific conditions that made it possible. It was the perfect storm of seismic activity, topography, and geology that resulted in the massive wave. In a way, the disaster offered a rare opportunity for scientists to study how large-scale landslides and earthquakes can create such intense tsunamis, something they may not have been able to study under normal circumstances. Looking forward, scientists began to consider what the future might hold for Lituya Bay. While the region's seismic activity had been relatively stable in the years since the 1958 megatsunami, the underlying geological factors that caused the disaster are still very much in play. The Pacific and North American tectonic plates continue to shift, and the possibility of another landslide or earthquake remains a real threat. But what makes Lituya Bay particularly dangerous is its location and its ability to amplify the effects of such events. The bay's narrow, enclosed shape funnels the energy of any seismic or landslide event directly into the water, making it a potential breeding ground for another megatsunami. As we move forward in this story, it's important to consider how the Lituya Bay megatsunami has shaped our understanding of natural disasters and the science behind them. The lessons learned from this event continue to inform the ways we study and prepare for similar events in the future, highlighting the need for more research into the dynamics of earthquakes, landslides, and tsunamis. The events of July 9th, 1958 may be long behind us, but the lessons they left us with are still very much relevant today. As we reach the conclusion of the Lituya Bay megatsunami story, it's important to reflect on the lasting impact the event has had on both scientific research in the local area. The 1958 megatsunami was a game changer for the way we understand the power of nature and the destructive potential of tsunamis. Despite the rare and isolated circumstances of this event, it has sparked ongoing investigations into similar areas around the world, all of which have the potential to experience a similar catastrophe. One of the most significant consequences of the megatsunami was the heightened awareness it brought to the vulnerability of coastal areas that are situated near active geological zones. As a result, scientists began to study how earthquakes and landslides could trigger tsunamis in other regions with similar topographical and seismic conditions. While Lituya Bay is an extreme case, the principles of how it all unfolded have been applied to better understand tsunamis in general, especially those that might occur along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic activity is high. Although there were no fatalities directly linked to the megatsunami, the disaster highlighted the importance of early warning systems and preparedness in regions at risk for tsunamis. The speed at which the waves surged through Lituya Bay left little time for people to respond, making it clear that places with a history of seismic activity need to be on high alert. In the years following the event, efforts to improve tsunami warning systems became a priority for many coastal regions around the world. Scientists also started to look more closely at the effects of large landslides and how they could trigger waves, a crucial element in preventing or mitigating future disasters. The unique and isolated geography of Lituya Bay has also made it a focal point for geological studies. Researchers continue to study the bay and its surroundings to this day, gathering data on its ongoing seismic activity and the state of its landscape. The potential for another major landslide or earthquake is still very much a possibility, and while it may be impossible to predict exactly when or where the next catastrophic event will strike, the lessons learned from the 1958 megatsunami have paved the way for better preparedness and understanding of similar events elsewhere. What is perhaps most striking about the Lituya Bay megatsunami is the sheer power of nature. It serves as a reminder that even in the most peaceful and remote locations, the Earth's forces are always at work, shaping and reshaping the landscape in ways we can't always predict. This disaster may have been an extreme and rare event, but it's one that serves as a warning that nothing on Earth is immune from the power of natural forces. In the years since the disaster, the memory of the megatsunami has lingered, both in the scientific community and in the local memory. It stands as a testament to nature's ability to surprise us and remind us of how little control we truly have over the forces that shape our world. Lituya Bay may seem quiet and peaceful today, but it still holds the potential for the kind of sudden, devastating event that forever alters the landscape. As we finish reflecting on the events of July 9th, 1958, it's clear that Lituya Bay continues to be a unique geological and environmental location that holds important lessons for all of us. It's a reminder that while we may not be able to control or fully predict these catastrophic events, understanding and respecting the natural world around us is essential for surviving and navigating the unpredictability of life on Earth. And who knows, perhaps one day scientists will uncover even more secrets hidden in the depths of Lituya Bay. Until then, we continue to study, learn, and prepare, taking the lessons of the past to better understand the future. Did you know that the 2017 Greenland Tsunami was triggered by a massive glacier collapse, sending waves over 90 feet high crashing into the coastline? This massive event, which happened on June 17th, 2017, is one of the rare occasions where such a destructive natural disaster was caught on camera. The footage is breathtaking and shows the immense power of nature, reminding us just how fragile our planet can be. The incident took place in the Karat Fjord, a remote part of Western Greenland. Greenland is home to the world's second largest ice sheet, which is over 3 kilometers thick in some places. This massive ice sheet has been shrinking rapidly over the past century, mainly due to rising temperatures. The ice loss is accelerating, and the result is something we're only starting to understand. The loss of ice leads to the collapse of glaciers, creating a dangerous ripple effect that can cause catastrophic events. In the case of this tsunami, the glacier that collapsed had been rapidly melting and breaking off into the fjord, adding pressure to the ice and ultimately causing the dramatic collapse. The tsunami itself was not caused by an earthquake, as most tsunamis are. Instead, it was triggered by the sudden and violent collapse of a section of the glacier into the fjord. When a large section of ice breaks off from the glacier, it can displace a significant amount of water. This displacement generates a huge wave, which in this case surged over 90 feet high. The enormous wave quickly moved toward the shore, sending water crashing into the surrounding coastline. Although the event occurred in a relatively remote area, the power of the tsunami was still strong enough to be recorded and studied by researchers who happened to be in the area at the time. This moment, captured on film, serves as a reminder of the terrifying power that nature can unleash. It also highlights just how vulnerable areas like Greenland are to the effects of climate change. Rising temperatures are melting the glaciers at an alarming rate, and these massive ice sheets are contributing to the rising sea levels we've been hearing about for years. When ice sheets melt and glaciers collapse, they don't just contribute to sea level rise, they can trigger other catastrophic events, like this one. The 2017 Greenland Tsunami is just one example of how our changing climate is leading to increasingly extreme and dangerous natural disasters. The wave itself was incredibly dramatic. The scientists who filmed it were able to capture not just the size of the wave, but also the sense of how quickly it came crashing down. The image of that giant wall of water moving toward the shore, with plumes of water rising into the air, is unforgettable. It's a terrifying reminder that no matter how much we may think we control our environment, nature is still in charge, and sometimes it has the power to reshape everything in an instant. So, what exactly happened in Greenland that day, and what caused the glacier to collapse? The ice sheets in Greenland have been under stress for a long time. As the temperatures rise, the ice sheet begins to melt, weakening its structure. In the case of the Karet Fjord, a piece of the glacier became unstable, and it eventually cracked and fell into the fjord. This sudden release of ice caused the displacement of water, which created a wave so large that it crashed into the shoreline with unimaginable force. Though this was a relatively isolated area, the scale of the event makes it a warning sign of how climate change could affect coastal communities in the future. The fact that this event was caught on camera is one of the rare opportunities we have to witness nature's power in such a dramatic way. While this tsunami did not cause significant loss of life, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that climate change and glacial activity can bring. In the coming parts, we'll explore how the tsunami impacted the region, the aftermath, and the lasting effects of this event on our understanding of climate change's potential to create such sudden and severe natural disasters. The Karet Fjord tsunami on June 17, 2017 was a stark demonstration of the overwhelming force nature can unleash. What made this event even more remarkable was the rarity of such occurrences. While tsunamis are often associated with earthquakes, this one was triggered by the collapse of a massive glacier, which is an event that doesn't happen every day. The glacier's collapse created an enormous wave, sending it barreling toward the coast at a speed and size that was beyond comprehension. Scientists, researchers, and residents in the area witnessed something that few people ever experience firsthand: a natural disaster of this scale and power. The real story here isn't just the tsunami itself, but the warning signs that preceded it. For years before the collapse, the ice sheet in Greenland had been melting at an accelerated rate. This rapid melting isn't just a phenomenon we're seeing in Greenland. It's part of a much larger pattern of global warming and climate change. As the temperatures rise, glaciers, which were once stable, begin to break apart and release huge chunks of ice into the surrounding waters. This process, known as calving, is not unusual, but the scale at which it occurred in this instance was beyond what most experts anticipated. What set the 2017 Greenland tsunami apart from others was the sheer size of the glacier collapse. The Karet Fjord, where the glacier had been slowly eroding, became the site of one of the most dramatic natural events in recent history. The collapse of the glacier was so sudden and violent that it displaced a huge volume of water, which led to the creation of a giant wave. This tsunami was so powerful that it reached up to 90 feet in height. The size and speed at which it traveled is a reminder of just how quickly natural disasters can strike, especially when driven by larger environmental factors like the melting ice sheets. While the tsunami did not cause fatalities, it was a wake-up call. It's one thing to hear about the melting of the Greenland ice sheet or the rising sea levels, but it's another thing entirely to see the immediate effects of those changes in real time. This wasn't a slow-moving crisis. This was something sudden and uncontrollable. The collapse of the glacier, followed by the formation of a massive tsunami, showed just how fragile our coastlines are. The event underscored the dangers coastal communities face due to the effects of climate change and how rapidly things can go from a minor event to something devastating. Scientists who were working in the area that day were fortunate to capture this extraordinary moment on film. The footage not only allowed us to witness the power of the wave, but also gave us a glimpse into the forces of nature that we often overlook. Seeing a glacier collapse in real time, followed by a tsunami crashing against the shore, provided an unparalleled perspective on the vulnerability of areas like Greenland to the changes caused by global warming. It's these types of events that serve as a visual reminder of the broader environmental challenges we face as a planet. Greenland's ice sheet has been shrinking for decades, but the events of June 17, 2017 made it painfully clear just how severe the consequences of this shrinking are. The aftermath of this tsunami was immediate and violent, but its long-term effects may be even more profound. As more glaciers continue to collapse and ice sheets melt, The world will be faced with a rising number of unpredictable and catastrophic events, from larger waves and stronger storms to increasingly devastating natural disasters that affect not just remote regions but coastal cities around the world. The Greenland tsunami stands as a symbol of the kind of dangers we will increasingly face in the years to come if we don't take action. But what can be done to stop the process? Scientists and experts are continually studying these changes, seeking ways to predict such events and protect vulnerable communities. The solutions aren't easy, and they require global cooperation. But understanding the causes, the impacts, and the magnitude of such events is the first step toward addressing the wider climate crisis, and ensuring that future generations don't have to live through the devastating consequences of a rapidly changing world. The immediate aftermath of the June 17, 2017 tsunami in Greenland was both breathtaking and terrifying. The wave, with its massive force, reshaped the landscape of the Karet Fjord in ways that were hard to comprehend. While the event itself was over in a matter of minutes, the damage it caused would last for much longer. It wasn't just the destruction of the glacier itself. The real devastation came from the massive wave it created. As it crashed into the coastline, it left behind a scene of complete destruction. In the hours after the tsunami, the coastline was left in a state of disarray. Huge chunks of ice that had broken off from the glacier were scattered all along the shore. Rocks, trees, and debris were tossed around, some carried far from their original locations. The violent force of the wave had reshaped the coastline, washing away anything in its path. It wasn't just the physical destruction that was concerning. The event also revealed the delicate balance of the area's ecosystem. The fjord, which was home to a variety of wildlife, had been disturbed. The turbulent waters displaced marine life and caused irreversible damage to the natural environment. As the waves receded, it became clear that this was a dramatic reminder of how quickly nature can change, how fragile our ecosystems are, and how easily they can be disrupted by even a single catastrophic event. Though the immediate impact was catastrophic, the tsunami also served as an environmental warning. The glacier that collapsed, sending the huge wave crashing toward the shore, had been melting at an accelerating rate. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a small glimpse into the future of what could happen if global warming continues to progress at its current pace. If these glacial collapses become more common, the number of such tsunamis may rise, leading to even greater destruction in coastal areas. The loss of ice from the Greenland ice sheet has already contributed to rising sea levels, which in turn has made coastal communities more vulnerable to storms and flooding. This particular event was like a microcosm of the much larger challenges that lie ahead if nothing is done to slow the effects of climate change. The fact that the tsunami in Greenland occurred in a remote area where human life was not lost was in many ways a small blessing. However, the power of this natural disaster made it clear that it could happen anywhere. Coastal communities around the world, particularly those in low-lying areas, are at risk of similar events if the glaciers continue to melt at this alarming rate. It's a reminder that, although these events are still rare, their potential to cause widespread damage is significant. As we learn from these events, it's essential that we invest in understanding the science behind glacial activity and tsunamis, and how we can better predict and prepare for such disasters in the future. In the days and weeks following the tsunami, researchers from around the world flocked to the area to study the impact of the wave and the glacier collapse. The footage captured by scientists working in the region became a valuable resource, providing insights into the power of these kinds of natural events. But the true impact of the tsunami on Greenland's environment and the larger issue of climate change became a central focus for many experts. This one event acted as a stark reminder that the problems caused by global warming are not just about rising temperatures. They are about the complete disruption of ecosystems, the destruction of landscapes, and the unpredictable chain reactions that can follow. As experts began to analyze the data and the footage of the event, one thing became clear: we are entering a new era of climate risk. Events like the Greenland tsunami are not isolated occurrences, but part of a larger pattern of increasingly extreme weather events and natural disasters. The changing climate is already reshaping the world around us, and as we continue to see more and more of these kinds of events, the importance of taking action to address climate change becomes even more urgent. The impact of the Greenland tsunami serves as a cautionary tale, one that reminds us of the pressing need to tackle the environmental crisis before it's too late. The June 17, 2017 Greenland tsunami was a wake-up call. a stark reminder of the growing dangers of climate change and the powerful forces of nature that we are only beginning to understand. While the destruction caused by the massive wave was extraordinary, the most alarming aspect of the event was the role that the melting glaciers and rising temperatures played in its creation. Greenland, with its vast ice sheet that has been slowly but surely shrinking over the past century, is at the forefront of this global crisis. The event wasn't just an isolated disaster, it was a clear sign of the devastating consequences of climate change. The Greenland Tsunami serves as a powerful symbol of what can happen when nature's delicate balance is upset by human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels and the unchecked emission of greenhouse gases. Looking forward, it is clear that we need to pay more attention to the effects of glacial collapse and the associated risk of tsunami waves. Although the June 2017 disaster did not result in significant loss of life, the next event could easily take place in a more populated region with far-reaching consequences. The rapid rate at which Greenland's glaciers are melting suggests that tsunamis like the one we witnessed may become more frequent. As the glaciers continue to shed enormous amounts of ice into the sea, the risks of larger, more destructive tsunamis become more apparent. This is especially concerning for low-lying coastal areas around the world, where people are already facing the threat of rising sea levels and storm surges. Communities that live in these vulnerable regions must prepare for the worst and take measures to protect themselves. In addition to preparing for the immediate effects of such events, it is essential that we focus on long-term solutions to mitigate the causes of climate change. Reducing carbon emissions, transitioning to renewable energy sources, and implementing stronger environmental protection policies are all key steps that can help slow the melting of glaciers and the rise in sea levels. By addressing these root causes, we can not only reduce the risks of tsunamis, but also help stabilize the global climate for future generations. The event in Greenland should be seen not just as an isolated disaster, but as part of a larger trend of increasingly extreme weather events, driven by climate change. As we move forward, it's important to remember that the 2017 Greenland tsunami is not just a story of destruction, but also one of resilience and hope. The scientific community has responded to this event with a renewed commitment to studying and understanding the effects of climate change. Researchers are now more focused than ever on developing better tools and technologies to predict glacial calving, monitor sea levels, and warn communities about the potential for future tsunamis. The lessons learned from this event are helping us prepare for similar disasters in the future, but much more needs to be done. Increased funding for climate science, stronger international cooperation, and better disaster preparedness are crucial if we hope to protect vulnerable communities from the full impact of climate change. In conclusion, the 2017 Greenland tsunami is a powerful reminder that we cannot afford to ignore the impacts of climate change any longer. It is a call to action for all of us to do our part in slowing the destruction of our planet and protecting future generations from the devastating consequences of extreme weather events. While the wave that crashed into the Greenland coastline was a breathtaking display of nature's power, it also serves as a sobering warning of what lies ahead if we do not act swiftly and decisively. Let the tsunami be a symbol of change, a symbol that urges us to take responsibility for our environment before it's too late. The question is, will we heed the call?